Roman Reigns sends strong words to Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman. The tribal chief has broken his silence on the injury to Seth Rollins, which could keep him from exacting his revenge for WrestleMania 41. Roman Reigns breaks silence on Seth Rollins' injury, sends strong message to Paul Heyman. The tribal chief isn't holding back anymore. Roman Reigns finally addresses Seth Rollins' devastating injury, and what he says about Paul Heyman will leave you speechless. In this intense and emotional backstage confrontation, Roman Reigns reveals exactly how he feels about being denied his revenge at WrestleMania 41. With Seth Rollins potentially sidelined, the power balance in WWE is shifting, and Reigns is ready to reclaim his throne. It happened in a moment when the lights were low, and the cameras weren't supposed to be rolling. When the arenas were empty and the corridors echoed with the footsteps of security and the whisper of tension no one dared voice. Roman Reigns, once the undeniable face of WWE dominance, stood in the shadows of a new era. The era of betrayal. The era of false alliances. And now, the era of reckoning. The tribal chief had remained silent for weeks. Since the brutal aftermath of WrestleMania 41, where Seth Rollins walked out victorious, scarred, but not broken, Roman Reigns had vanished from public view. Fans speculated he was injured, recovering, or even plotting a full-scale coup against WWE leadership. But the truth? Roman Reigns was waiting. Watching. Breathing in the silence. Letting the weight of betrayal settle like ash on his shoulders. And when the time came to speak, to rise again from the ruins of shattered trust, he would make sure his words would shake the foundations of everything Paul Heyman had tried to build. Seth Rollins, the so-called visionary, was supposed to be the new champion of loyalty and change. A man who claimed to be rewriting the future of WWE. But what happened after WrestleMania wasn't victory. It was theft. Roman had been robbed. Not by Rollins directly, but by the betrayal that had festered behind the scenes. By Paul Heyman, the man who once knelt before him and called him my tribal chief. And now? Seth Rollins lay on a hospital bed, knee shattered, future uncertain, and Heyman nowhere to be found. The silence was too loud to ignore. And Roman Reigns was done pretending. What began as a routine media interview following SmackDown spiraled into a confrontation that no one saw coming. The cameras were supposed to shut off after a simple promotional shoot backstage. But Roman, draped in his iconic black hoodie and a gaze that could cut through steel, asked the crew to keep rolling. No scripts. No teleprompters. No carefully worded PR. Just Roman. The man. The warrior. The betrayed. His voice was low at first. Controlled. But every word held the weight of unspoken fury. You think I didn't see it coming? He said, his eyes locked on the lens as if Paul Heyman himself was standing on the other end. You think I didn't feel it in my gut? That something was shifting? That the whispers weren't just rumors but warnings? There was no smile. No arrogance. Just raw, palpable hurt. He took a step closer to the camera. Seth Rollins, you're in a hospital bed right now. And part of me wants to feel sorry for you. I really do. But how do I pity the man who stood across from me at WrestleMania and smiled, knowing damn well what he and Paul Heyman had already set in motion? The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate. Crew members exchanged nervous glances. Even seasoned WWE staff, used to the intensity of backstage outbursts, could feel that this wasn't a promo. This was personal. Roman Reigns wasn't acting. He was unraveling a truth he'd kept buried far too long. I gave Heyman everything, he said, his voice cracking for the briefest second. I gave him trust, protection, a seat at the table. And he traded that for what? For Seth Rollins? For a man who's never known what it means to lead? Who's never carried this business on his back the way I have? Roman's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but restraint. You could feel that at any moment, years of composure could collapse into something dangerous. Violent. Truthful. He thinks just because Seth's knee gave out, the war is over. Roman hissed, now pacing. This was never about WrestleMania. It's bigger than one night. bigger than one match. This is about legacy. About who gets to control the soul of WWE when the smoke clears. And I'll be damned if I let a traitor like Heyman rewrite the history I bled to create. He stopped, breathing heavily, every inhale a storm trying to stay contained. Backstage, whispers began spreading like wildfire. WWE superstars leaned against the wall, holding their breath. Paul Heyman, nowhere to be seen, was reportedly locked in a suite on the upper level of the arena, eyes glued to the monitor, face pale, lips pursed in a silence that said more than words ever could. But Roman wasn't done. "You all call him the wise man," Roman said, turning his full attention back to the camera. "But wisdom doesn't stab you in the back when you're down. Wisdom doesn't align itself with weakness. What Heyman did wasn't smart. It was cowardice wrapped in strategy. He bet against the bloodline, and now he's going to learn what happens when you gamble with a chief." The words came slow, deliberate. Each one a knife to Seth. "I hope that hospital bed gives you time to think. Not just about your knee, or your career. But about how it feels to be a pawn. You didn't win at WrestleMania. You were used. Played. Sacrificed. And when you wake up, you'll realize Heyman never chose you. He used you to hurt me." The air seemed to still. The camera shook slightly, the operator's hands no longer steady. Reigns' voice had dropped to a whisper, but it carried more force than 1,000 promos screamed in rage. "To Paul, you ran from me once. Hid behind contracts, behind lawyers, behind security and TV time. But you can't hide forever. You made your choice. Now you live with it." The final line was whispered. Not spoken. It wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. And then, he stepped away from the camera. No exit speech. No closing statement. Just a nod to the crew. The lens faded to black, but the silence that followed was thunderous. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of Roman's backstage monologue leaked onto Twitter, X, Instagram, before WWE could even issue a statement. Hashtags trended, hashtag Tribal Chief returns, hashtag Heyman exposed, hashtag Rollins vs Reigns 2. Meanwhile, Paul Heyman was reportedly seen leaving the building flanked by 3 security officers, his head lowered, his phone glued to his ear. No comments to reporters. No retweets. No clever quips. Just silence, and that silence said everything. Sources close to the bloodline say Roman Reigns has been planning a return with a vengeance far greater than anyone anticipated. With Seth Rollins injured and Paul Heyman's loyalty shattered, the tribal throne stands empty, if only momentarily. But the man who once ruled with iron certainty is not returning as the same chief. He's returning as a wounded warrior. A king betrayed. A legacy under siege. And what comes next? Not a feud. Not a storyline. A reckoning. The moment Roman Reigns left that dimly lit backstage hallway, he didn't look back. Not once. Not at the camera. Not at the staff who stood frozen. Not even at the door he had just closed on an era that once defined him. Something in him had shifted, and the WWE locker room felt it. Roman wasn't just delivering a message to Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins, he was declaring war on betrayal itself. And in the war room of his mind, every silence, every stare, every word unspoken since WrestleMania became ammunition. Word spread like wildfire through the corridors of the arena. Even superstars with no loyalty to Roman, those who'd once feared or resented his dominance, began to murmur amongst themselves. Some said Roman looked haunted. Others said he looked focused. But no one could deny it anymore. The tribal chief was awake, and angrier than anyone had ever seen. Hours later, in a private suite inside the same building, Paul Heyman sat alone. The lights were dimmed. His phone sat face down on the table, notifications buzzing non-stop. On the massive monitor in front of him, he replayed Roman's message. Again. And again. And again. He knew Roman. Knew how he spoke when he was bluffing, when he was posturing, when he was genuinely hurt. But this time, he had heard something else in Roman's voice. Finality. There was no pitch. No demand. No manipulation. It wasn't about getting Heyman back. It was about finishing what had been started long before WrestleMania 41, before Seth Rollins ever stepped into Roman's spotlight. Paul's hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water. The confrontation was inevitable. The question now wasn't if it would happen, but how far Roman would go when it did. Backstage, WWE officials scrambled. The unsanctioned footage of Roman's outburst had gone viral, gaining over 5 million views across platforms within just 12 hours. Triple H, caught between respecting Roman's storytelling genius and managing the fallout, reportedly called an emergency meeting with WWE's creative team. But Roman's message wasn't fiction, it wasn't part of the show, this was personal warfare disguised as television drama. Meanwhile, Seth Rollins remained confined to his hospital suite in California, his right knee wrapped in bandages, his mobility restricted, and his silence more deafening than any interview could have been. For days, he refused to speak to anyone except his wife Becky Lynch and his doctor. When the footage of Roman's message reached him, Seth reportedly stared at the screen for over 20 minutes in silence. The once proud architect who had dethroned Roman Reigns on the grandest stage now stared at his television with a face that betrayed something deeper than regret. It was fear, not of Roman's words, but of the realization that the game had changed. Seth's victory had come at a cost. Not just to his body, but to the fragile chessboard of loyalties within WWE. And now, the king who had been toppled was standing once again, staring across the battlefield, and this time, he wasn't coming alone. Insiders close to Roman revealed that he's been in secret meetings over the past 2 weeks. Not just with the bloodline, but with names that haven't been associated with him in years. Former enemies, old allies, forgotten soldiers of war. Because for Roman Reigns, this isn't just about Seth or Paul anymore, this is about purging WWE of disloyalty. Every choice Heyman made, every whisper Seth spoke in his absence, every nod of approval backstage that didn't include Roman, he had seen it all. And he had memorized every name. He's rebuilding his empire, one anonymous source said. But it's not the bloodline you remember. This is something else. Something darker. On the next episode of SmackDown, Roman Reigns did not appear in the ring. He didn't need to. Instead, WWE aired a pre-recorded message, delivered in black and white, his face shrouded in shadow. His voice, low and unforgiving, "I've heard everything," he said. The jokes. The lies. The rumors. I've watched this company move on without me. Celebrate without me. And that's fine. Because while the world laughed, I sharpened my blade. He paused, breathing in deeply. Seth, heal up. You'll need both knees to run from what's coming. And Paul, my wise man. The next time I see you, I'm not coming to talk. The screen faded to black. No logo. No music, just the silence of a man who had spoken his final warning. The reactions were instant. WWE superstars tweeted cryptic messages. The locker room's atmosphere grew colder by the day. And fans, divided between loyalty to the visionary Seth Rollins and their enduring awe of Roman Reigns, took sides in a civil war that hadn't even begun. Becky Lynch was spotted leaving Seth's hospital suite with tear-stained eyes and a clenched jaw. She refused to speak to the press, but her silence spoke volumes. The thought of Roman targeting a vulnerable Seth wasn't far-fetched. In fact, many believed that it wasn't a matter of if Roman would strike, but when, back at WWE headquarters, Paul Heyman made his first internal statement since the broadcast, "I didn't betray Roman," he reportedly told Triple H behind closed doors. "I just stopped protecting him." But in the eyes of the tribal chief, there's no difference. Because for Roman Reigns, protection was loyalty. Silence was allegiance. And now, with both shattered, there was only one thing left to do: cleanse the kingdom. The tribal war that had begun with words would not end with them. Roman was building something unseen, something untold. He wasn't forming a faction, he was creating a legacy born from fire, betrayal, and vengeance. And when he returned, not just to the ring, but to the throne, there would be no more forgiveness. No more mercy, just retribution. And when Paul Heyman hears that door slam shut behind him in the locker room, he'll know the chief has arrived. The world outside the squared circle had barely caught its breath. Fans still reeling from the footage of Roman Reigns' venom-laced monologue now found themselves teetering on the edge of something far more unhinged, a whisper in the air that something new, something monstrous, was forming behind Roman's silence, and it started not with a thunderous return in front of 20,000 fans. Not with theme music. Not even with a steel chair. It began with a door. A quiet, creaking door caught slightly ajar backstage at a recent WWE Raw taping. Security cameras picked it up first. In the dim hallway just beyond gorilla position, where only top-tier talent and producers are allowed, a figure stepped through that door, face concealed by a hoodie, footsteps soft, calculated. And just behind him, another figure, larger, more imposing. Silent as death, they didn't speak. They didn't need to, because they were already known not by name. Not yet, but by aura. A storm was building, quiet, slow, patient, and in the center of it all stood Roman Reigns. No longer adorned with gold. No longer weighed down by ceremonial rituals or titles. Now, he was something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose, and he was assembling an army of the forgotten. That same night, backstage sources confirmed something that sent tremors through the locker room. Roman Reigns had been seen in closed-door meetings with Jacob Fatu and Zilla Fatu, two men whose bloodline ran just as deep as his, yet who had been overlooked, underestimated, and exiled by Paul Heyman's influence for months. The bloodline as the WWE Universe knew it. That was over. What Roman was building now wasn't a family. It was a funeral procession. One designed to bury everything Heyman and Rollins had tried to reshape. The following week on SmackDown, a cryptic video aired without warning. No logo. No WWE watermark. Just shaky handheld footage of a locker room mirror, fogged by steam. And scrawled across it in red, "The Chief still watches." The camera panned to reveal the unmistakable tattooed hand of Jacob Fatu, slamming a chair down onto a table, and walking off without a word. The internet exploded. #Roman New Era trended instantly. Speculation ran rampant. Was this the return of the Shield in a new form? Was it a new incarnation of the bloodline? But those close to Roman knew better. This wasn't a stable. It was a reckoning. A war room assembled not to share power, but to eliminate all who dared touch the throne. Backstage, Seth Rollins remained isolated from the chaos. His knee injury had worsened. Doctors now speculated it could take 9 months or longer to fully recover. And with SummerSlam drawing near, rumors circulated that Seth wouldn't be medically cleared in time. This gave Roman the one thing he craved most: time to plan, time to watch Heyman squirm, time to sow chaos inside WWE until no one could tell who was truly in control. And Paul Heyman was cracking. At an untelevised live event, Heyman was seen backstage pacing relentlessly, issuing orders to any superstar who would listen: Braun Breaker, Bronson Reed, even Drew McIntyre. But they didn't listen the way Roman once did, because deep down, they could feel it too. Heyman wasn't leading anymore. He was running. WWE cameras caught up with Heyman at the Performance Center days later. A journalist asked, simply, "Do you have any response to Roman Reigns' message?" Heyman didn't blink. "Roman Reigns is not the man he once was," he said, voice taut with fear. "He has abandoned honor. He has descended into madness. And I will not let him destroy everything I built with Seth." He turned away quickly, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He was lying, because Paul Heyman knows what happens when Roman Reigns stops caring about redemption and starts chasing vengeance. In a secret phone call leaked online, allegedly between Heyman and an unnamed producer, Heyman was heard saying, "He's too quiet. That's what scares me. When Roman's loud, you can fight him. But when he's quiet, it means someone's getting hurt." Meanwhile, Roman continued sending messages. No interviews. No promos, just whispers. Locker rooms turned up vandalized. Seth Rollins' nameplate, once proudly affixed to his dressing room, was found cracked down the center, with a note taped beside it: "False kings fall fastest." And still, Rollins said nothing, because he couldn't. The architect of this war was now confined to bed, while his greatest rival built a revolution around his silence. Whispers began to spread through WWE that Roman wasn't working alone. Beyond Jacob and Zilla, others were being recruited. Malachi Black had reportedly met with Roman in secret. Solo Sikoa was seen looking torn during SmackDown tapings. Even whispers of a returning Dean Ambrose began to float across the internet like smoke over kindling. No one knew who Roman would bring next, but everyone knew why. This wasn't about titles, this wasn't even about WrestleMania, this was about erasing betrayal from WWE, one name at a time, and at the top of that list, Paul Heyman. What Roman said next would be broadcast live, in front of a sold-out crowd at Madison Square Garden. The arena had expected a teaser. Instead, they got a funeral. Roman Reigns' music didn't play. He walked out in silence, black shirt. No pyro. No swagger, just war in his eyes. The crowd hushed. He stepped into the ring, took a mic, and looked into the camera. I was supposed to defend my legacy at WrestleMania, he said, but I was denied that chance. Not by injury. Not by fate. But by cowards. He paused. Paul Heyman. You once said I was your tribal chief. You knelt. You promised loyalty. But when I fell, you didn't catch me. You didn't protect me. You fed me to the wolves. A hush fell. Seth Rollins. You were the shield that stabbed me in the back. You took the win. You took the crowd. But now you're on crutches. And when you return, if you return, I'll take everything you have left. The final sentence echoed through the garden like a storm. This is your warning. The chief is no longer asking. I'm taking back what's mine, brick by brick, body by body. The mic dropped, the lights cut. The screen flickered with a single word, reckoning. And just like that, Roman Reigns vanished into the dark again, but the war had already begun. SummerSlam 2025 was already poised to be a spectacle. But no one, no commentator, no fan, no WWE insider, could have predicted what was about to unfold. The night had been electric. Title defenses, legends returning, high-flying chaos. But underneath the glitz and pyro, an uneasy current ran through the building like a silent warning. Everyone knew something was coming. They just didn't know when, and then it happened right after the main event, a grueling match between Cody Rhodes and Gunther. When the arena was bathed in flickering lights and exhausted applause, the Titantron glitched, sparks. White noise, then darkness. Th.